You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by machinists. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson at Protein Machining, and this week I am joined by Brian Kippen of KAD Models. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks for also having me on this show. I've listened to several of them. It's actually fun to be part of one show that I like listening to, so that's good.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I know Jake on our last roundtable plugged you, and I had been meaning to reach out for a long time, but you were going through your big move that we'll get into at the time, and I was like, yeah, this seems like a very inopportune time to be like, hey, can I steal some hours from your day?
That's exactly when everybody else was trying to steal hours, so I appreciate that.
Well, real quick, if people haven't seen you online, what do you do? What does KAD Models do? Where can they find you? All that good stuff.
So I'm Brian Kippen. KAD Models and Prototypes is my business. I started it about 10 years ago, so before the internet. Before social media and instant machinists and all that shenanigans. We're a prototype manufacturing company. We specialize in things that you can't see. So again, it's like my favorite thing from school, which was show your work, and I don't have to. So that's a great place to be in, NDA prototype manufacturing. We work with a lot of large companies. We have 163 unique clients, and that spans everything from cars to medical to random tidbits. What I like to tell people is if I can see it and hold it, I can machine it. So we machine everything: titanium, magnesium, wood, plastic, steel, stainless steel, and a lot of aluminum. I think by far aluminum is my favorite thing to machine because it recycles easily and you don't break as many cutters, and so it's a little cheaper that way. And so I got established on the West Coast. I kind of found machining by kind of by accident. I was living on the East Coast when I was 20. When I graduated high school, my mom had these two rules: you can either go to college or you can find a place to live. So I went to college for 7 days, I think, but it was Utah, so there was also a drive out there and a drive back. So I like to say I went to college for 2 weeks. And I was going to school for automotive technology at Weber State University, and I quickly realized that I don't really want to pay for this. So I came back to Vermont, where I grew up, and got a job. I had a summer job as a mechanic, and I just called the service manager and say, "Hey, can I have my job back?" And he's like, "Guess so. Aren't you in college?" "Nah, no, not working." So I went back and I was working at a Honda dealership, and kind of, I'm a car nut, still am a car nut. Got too many of those to talk about. And I just, really liked cars, but I found I liked them more than the people who owned them. And, I always
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah, I have this rule that if I can't get up in the morning to go to work, I should change what I'm doing. And it wasn't too long. It was probably about 6 months later. As an entry level technician, you're changing oil. In the Northeast, there's a lot of tire changing in the fall and in the spring, and that's not really a lot of fun work when you've got 200 tires a week to change. It's first couple sets of tires kind of fun. You do your first set of tires on an Audi, that's sort of fun. Low profile, there's no fun. And then so I just maybe it's because I'm not challenged. So I decided to move over to Chrysler, and there's a lot of challenge there because this was 2002. So they had just come out with the Jeep Liberty and all this other stuff. And it was like, there are tons of problems with those. Jeep Grand Cherokee had brake issues. So that was fun for a little bit, but I didn't like the environment I was working in. It was too competitive. We were a flat rate shop, and I was good. And so I got a lot more done, but then somebody glued my toolbox shut. I was like, I don't like this.
Wow.
So it's really hard to do work if you've got super glue in your locks. So I moved off to this tiny little dealership. There was another Chrysler dealership, and I worked there for about a year. But somewhere in that first 6 months, I was talking to my mom, and she's like, you should really get out of here. Like, yeah, well, if I'm going to get out of here, I'm going to have to save money, and to save money, I'm going to have to move back in if that's okay. So we negotiated a price that was reasonable, $50 a week, which, at when you're making $15 an hour, I probably own $13 an hour. $50 a week is not chump change.
Right.
And and always for some reason Siri likes to think that I'm talking to her. So anyway, I made that deal with my mom, and I saved about $1,000, and she had said, you should go to the West Coast. So I've got a couple friends out there. There's one person that I'd heard about all growing up. His name is Patrick McCorder. He's a model maker. I don't know what a model maker is. I mean, he was somebody who was talked about when I was a little kid. And so I decided to drive cross country, and I did. I didn't let anybody really know that I was going to show up. And I get there. I have a half brother in the Bay Area, called him. I was able to stay with him for one night. And then I went back. I was so overwhelmed with the population. So where I grew up, population of 1,200. San Francisco Bay Area, slightly more populated.
Just a little bit.
So I was overwhelmed after the first night. So I drove east, stayed in a hotel. I didn't have a cell phone at that point in time. So I had called my mom on a payphone, and I was like, hey, I was thinking about getting a cell phone, but that's when it was like the cell phone costs, and then you had to pay some stupid amount to get a cell phone contract. And it was probably $300 total, which when I left Vermont, I had a little over 1,000. So that was a ton of money. My mom said, get a cell phone. I was like, great, good idea, responsible. So I did. And then I called her friend Patrick, and Patrick just kind of sound gruff guy. And he said, just come by and we'll have a look at you. So I basically go into this guy's place, and he's got a small little machine shop in his living room. He's got 3 computers in there. He's got a table saw. I mean, he's a bachelor, so that's probably fine. Nobody's asking questions about why is there a manual lathe, a CNC machine, a paint booth, table saw, bandsaw, belt, sander, all this, like a mini little shop. And I started asking questions like, what is this stuff? This looks like a fancy drill press. Never seen any of it. And he explained it to me, and he said, you won't really care about it. But slowly over the course of a few months, I kind of wore him down, and he showed me what CNC machining was. And he started showing me pictures. At this point, he was retired, of what he used to do. And he used to make models, like 100% working models for large design firms. He worked with IDEO. He worked with Apple. He worked with all these companies. Some of them are still around. And he built functional prototypes. And I thought that was the coolest stuff in the world. So being 20 and not knowing anything, I was in California. I got a job as a mechanic because that's what I knew how to do. And I was then frustrated with that. There was no easy segue from mechanic through this guy who was retired to machining. So what did I do? I joined the military because that's logic. That's 20-year-old logic. So it's like I joined the Marines. Joining the Marines was, I figure if I'm going to do something difficult, I might as well make it the most difficult. And it was the short story long on that one is I was doing a casualty evacuation exercise. It was practice. There was no dead bodies. And the guy I was paired with was about 200 pounds. I, at that point, was probably about 135.
Oh my God.
So it was a mile exercise, and I stepped on a rock funny, and I broke a foot. Something felt funny. I didn't know what I had done. And then, I don't know, about a quarter mile later, with the left foot, same type of thing happened. And I ended up breaking both of my feet.
Oh my goodness.
It was about 6 months later, things were not healing right. And I got discharged from the Marine Corps for medical reasons. So then back to the Bay Area. Here I am, limping. So now I really needed something new to do because walking around, standing on my feet wasn't going to be good for a while. So I had time to think, time to do stuff, and I had a place to live. And first thing I did is I got a car to restore because I wanted something, just to screw around with. When I was in the military, I saved all my money, so I had some money saved up. I bought a. That's where cars really took off for me. I bought a Datsun 240Z at that point, and it was what I call a takeout car. It was car, and then there was about 50 boxes worth of parts that had come off of the car by previous owners.
Yep.
And so I assembled that, and meanwhile was talking to Patrick about what I was going to do, and I really wanted to be a machinist. And he's like, "Well, I'll introduce you to somebody." So this guy by the name of John Dove owned a small little model shop where he did urethane casting, CNC machining with an old 97 Fadal 16 XT, and also was trying to get good at urethane or silicone molding. So I basically started as a shop floor sweeper. I just kind of paid attention. He was at the same time redoing a house, so I got to help do things like dig a French drain and all this really practical machining stuff. My mom had gone to Berkeley, and she came out for a trip and introduced me to this guy by the name of Ethan Silva. And Ethan owned this company and still runs this company called Performance Structures. And Performance Structures, for the people that don't know, built the Bean in Chicago. In Millennium Park is that big, shiny, it's called the Cloud Gate sculpture. That was made in Oakland, California.
Oh, cool.
All the pieces of that, there's 168 pieces. They're rolled 316 steel that's then welded on a frame, and then those components go inside of a big old machine, and the surfaces are machined to pretty close to what they need to be. Then it comes off and gets ground and polished. And as things went along, I ended up starting at that company right at the end of that project. And I was just, my mom made this introduction. I was grinding stuff on slack belts and things along those lines and learning about polishing steel. But I was really interested in how this job's 6-axis gantry mill was operated, because it was really neat. The operator was on the x-axis, and as the machine moved, you moved too. So I pestered the guys up in the crow's nest who were programming that machine. I wanted to know what they were doing. It just so happened they programmed in SurfCam, similar to how the other job that I had. I decided, to work in both companies. So I would work from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. and then go and work on this huge stuff from 3 until I was done working, which was sometimes midnight, sometimes 3 a.m., sometimes 4:15. It kind of depended on what was going on there, but it was really a lot of fun for me to be working with really small stuff and also large components. But as with any starting career, people only really consider you for what you know or what they think you know. So I got to this point where I was like, working 2 jobs was kind of taking a lot out. I was working, I don't know, probably on average 12 hours a day, which seemed like a lot at that point. It's nothing. It's nothing now. But I really wanted to do more of the small machining and have more exposure to that. And so I had been working both at Performance and for John Dove for about 3 years. And I knew enough about programming. So I started looking for jobs that were hiring for SurfCam programmers. And I found one in Sunnyvale, so Silicon Valley. And went down with it for an interview. I brought all the parts that I had made, and kind of that was my, as a machinist, that's kind of your resume is what you've been able to manufacture.
Right.
And they offered me a job right on the spot. So I decided, well, I'll give 2 weeks notice and I'll start this job. And it was really like, this company, A&J Product Solutions, they were really, kind of a newer ownership, older company. It used to be called Contour. Contour had been around for years and years, and the owners of that company had sold off to one of the employees, Art. And I was really able to shine at that place because nobody knew what I didn't know. So what I like to call CBS, I creatively bullshit my way into being able to do everything.
Okay.
And that's kind of, you need that environment that allows you to make mistakes and to work through them. And I was building a lot of parts for Master Patterns for their molding department. That's Modulin. So if you crash into Modulin, not really a big deal. You might have to tape it up, bondo it, glue it back together, and then recut, but not a huge deal. And as things progressed, we started getting more and bigger clients. And it was just a lot of fun making tiny components, building fully functional prototypes, and things like that. But at about 2 years in, I was promoted to director of operations. And at 20, so it was 26. When you're 26 in a machine shop and you're in charge of people that are older than you, all of them 5 to 10 to 20 years older, it's kind of a difficult place to be because nobody really wants to take you seriously for a while. But it turned out to be a really great position. I got a lot of exposure to how businesses are run and things like that. But I realized that I wanted to do this on my own. So I was thinking about it. I was talking to Patrick, who's become my mentor for many things. And he said, well, why don't you talk to John again? So John Dove, who I was working for, had, he's in his late 50s, early 60s. And we decided, this might work as a partnership. He's got his landing and I've got my runway. And so we partnered up and transferred, I bought into his old company and then we transferred everything into KAD. So KAD was Kippen and Dove, KAD.
Oh, I was wondering where that came from.
Yep. And so we were in Oakland. The location that we were in, he had been in for probably about 20 years at that point. That area of Oakland was and still is not very shiny. There'd be, old mattresses and random things tossed out. And one time John was leaving work and his truck wasn't there anymore. And I was like, I think we should probably move. So I went on Craigslist and was looking for commercial space. And I found this place in Alameda where KAD still is. 3,500 square feet, really recently renovated brick building. Used to be the Listo pencil factory. So the landlords really liked the idea of manufacturing. So it kind of all worked out really well. So shut down on a Friday, KAD in Oakland, moved everything over. And then by Tuesday was up and running again. What had happened is I had been working, kind of building this idea, starting to get clients and gain traction. And I had enough friends in the industry. And one of the nice things about manufacturing is when you're working directly with engineers tend to change jobs, especially in development fields. So I'd worked with several engineers who had gone from one company to a new company, and we were still in contact. So they said, well, why don't we try you for this project? So I was able to get projects within 6 months of starting, and then things started really taking off from there. And so I made my first hire in September of 2012. And that's, one of my still current team members in California. He manages the California shop at this point. And added another machine. Really what it was for me is like building people who, in the Bay Area, there's a ton of people who are really educated, and skilled trades, manufacturing stuff. It's really not that easy to get somebody who's fast-paced prototype manufacturing. I mean, you guys have had Jeff Teidekin on. He's one of those, he's another one of those guys who's really good at doing one-offs and kind of crazy. We all kind of talk to each other. All of us prototype machinists in the Bay Area know each other for some reason, because there's 3 or 4. No.
Right. Well, you want somebody to commiserate. I mean, it's not an easy lifestyle. Like, you have somebody tell you like, oh, I need this like in, 20 hours. Can you do it? You're like, well, we'll figure it out. Like,
yeah. And we can do it in 20 hours if we have material and we don't scrap anything, because with prototyping, when you're building one and it's a very expensive block of material, you can't really afford to do two, and the client really doesn't want to pay for two. So there's this fine line between doing it really fast and then also doing it really right, which is sometimes counterproductive because you want to check 3 times before you hit cycle start. So it's a brutal world, but it's a lot of fun because when there's a major failure, you don't have to see it again, and when there's a major success, well, you don't have to see it again. Oftentimes we'll do an iteration, but rarely do we see production from prototype. I built the company around doing that type of work, continuing to iterate, and then once it's production level, it gets passed on to other companies. We stay lean and we stay current. But so I guess it was in 2015. At that point, the company was building. I was doing a ton of work, making sure that it was going to increase. And John was slowing down. He wasn't getting new clients. The work that we were doing kind of eclipsed his capabilities. And for me, it was a frustration, and for him, it was a frustration. And I was like, had this conversation. I think it's time for you to go. And that was a very expensive conversation. About 3 months later, it cost $870,000 to say goodbye. So Oof. that was a big thing. And I'm a person who's really, once I have an idea and I'm confident in its feasibility, I just go for it. In hindsight, I could have probably shut everything down, started up again, and not had that headache and expense. But I'd already developed a company name, had a location, had equipment, and it just seemed so much more expensive to try to start over and be like, oh, now I'm over here.
Right.
So that was in the long run, I believe, and I'm going to keep telling myself until I'm really comfortable with the right thing to do. So at that point, I decided to, continue to build, work with more clients. We got a couple pretty key companies. One thing that's maybe not the most normal is we're a small company, but we work directly with design firms and larger companies. We rarely take on subbed out work. And I think it's very beneficial because when you're taking on subbed out work, if that shop that you're working with gets lean, then you have nothing to do.
Yep.
So it's a huge risk. It's also really difficult to get, say you're 2 guys and you want to go after a large company. They're going to say, what can you provide that this company over here with 500 employees can't? And you're like, we're nice.
Yeah. You know my name. Like,
yeah. We can talk. You can call me at midnight, which happens. So I'm building the company, and we're at that point where, 2018, I think it was 2017, I decided, hey, I'm going to see what this IMTS thing is about. So that was 2018. And at the same time of IMTS, I decided to buy a Haas 5-axis machine. I had sold the Fadal and replaced it with another Haas because the Fadal was a Fadal. They're absolutely fantastic machines, I think. I just really couldn't do much with that machine. It had like 3K of memory.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a prototype machinist doing complex surfacing, 3K is not fun. So doing a drip feed and figuring out how to go from USB to RS-232 and then making sure that you hit the right shift +1, 5, 6, and then enter, go.
Right.
So that machine went. But the 5-axis machine was one of those, like, did we have 5-axis work? No, but at the same time, I'd watched enough videos to see how neat it was. And that's kind of how I make a lot of key business decisions, is thinking how cool something is. And then what it can do for me. So 2018 was kind of a big year for that growth. Actually, meeting more machinists. When you're a machinist and you're busy, you tend to just meet the people that you work with and work for. And it is kind of a lonely world out there. You go out with friends, and they say, "Hey, what do you do?" And you say, "I'm a machinist," and they say, "All right. Meanwhile, what kind of TV do you like to watch?"
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and then if you mention something like you just did a project for X company, they're like, "Oh, you work for them?" No, not really. So we got the 5-axis machine in there. I met a lot of people at IMTS, human beings. Instagram was starting to really have that instant machinist community. So I made real connections. I think they're real. I still talk to them. Um,
That's just the algorithm talking to you.
yeah, I mean, but I think that's awesome because the algorithm keeps showing you the same thing over and over again. So at that point in time, this Selway Machine Tool, who's our West Coast distributor for Haas machines, HFO, had also had this trade show, or what do they call that? I don't know, open house, I guess. And they had on display this Trinity Automation AX5 robotic cell, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. But it's big and it's attached to a 5-axis machine, and we didn't have enough space in California. And I was like, well, that's just really too bad. I'm going to have to figure out how to make this work. So 2019, my good friend in Vermont was turning 40. So I came out for his birthday, and there was this building that used to be a tractor dealership for sale. It's actually 3 buildings, 18,000 square feet. And
Wow.
the price was right. I mean, it was less than 2 new machines. So two new Haas machines. But then it was also, you have to kind of run through the scenario. Okay, yeah, there's 18,000 square feet of buildings, but who's going to run equipment if you get equipment? So I got this idea of like, why don't I just get the robotic cell and that'll run the equipment? I mean, in theory.
Right.
And also, I did look at the local tech school, Vermont Technical College, had started this advanced manufacturing program in 2017. So it was July, and I sent an email to the director of the program and said, "Tell me about your program." And so it's summer. I'm kind of busy. I can talk to you on Monday. And I said, okay. So I sent an email to the town because in rural Vermont, there's no real zoning. Like if you're in a city, it's not like M1 or, commercial and residential. It's just this district. So
Right.
it had been a tractor, sales and service center since the 1960s. So I figured I should be able to do something slightly industrial. The town said, "Yeah, we can do that. You can submit a request for a variance because it was allowing 4,000 square feet to be used for manufacturing." And I was like, "That's not enough." So for $15, I applied for a variance. That was approved. So that was well in the mix. I started doing the checking out the things like the who's gonna work for me, where am I gonna get materials, all this stuff that's kind of an unknown when you go from an urban area where there's absolutely everything available, and then going to a rural area where I didn't even know manufacturing existed in Vermont, let alone where I would get material if I was going to manufacture. I made my first East Coast hire, Casey, she's our COO now. I really needed somebody who was on the East Coast to help with what we were doing. Turned out that the property, because it was used for service of heavy industrial equipment, they used things like brake clean and carburetor cleaner and stuff. And chlorinated solvents created this environmental concern, which actually didn't turn out to be much of anything, except for it showed up in the concrete, and that was about a year process to repurpose it and clean up that issue.
Oh no!
But the owners of the property were really good. I said, "Hey, my intention was to be up and running by late 2019, and I work fast, and obstacles are difficult for me to see. So when they come up, then I just try to overcome them as quickly as possible." So I had a few meetings and figured out a way to put machines on the floor by talking to the state and talking to the owners of the property and saying, hey, can we lease the property until this is cleaned up and we can buy it? And it was just sitting there, so it sounded pretty reasonable. So then I asked if we could lease it for $1,500 a month, which is really no money, but it would at least pay their property taxes and whatever. And I said I would pay for everything, but I was also going to upfit it, which meant, to go from a building that's running 110 or single phase 220 to doing 3-phase, this is going to, and then go from a Dungeness thing to a modern machine shop. The electrical alone costs about $20,000.
I'm sure. Yeah.
So they completely agreeable. The nice thing about the small town is I grew up locally, so I was kind of known. I wasn't just a stranger who was coming in and throwing these ideas that were like, yeah, good luck, kid. But I was able to get machines on the ground early 2020. We got the Trinity Automations AX5, a UMC 750, and then I got a Haas VF3SS with the 4th axis. And that was dropped on the floor January 2020. Trinity came out and set up that robotic cell and was ready to go in early February. I did a few practice jobs. I was in Vermont with my dog, and that's about it. But I was at the shop from 6 a.m. until I was just done at probably 10 or 11 p.m. and got things up and running and was, had a couple meetings, and I had, decided, well, in order to make this work, I'm going to have to probably figure out how to manage a shop on 2 sides of the country. I think the average person would say, I need to figure out how to manage 2 shops and then start making the efforts. But, so that, the idea was to go back to California, regroup. And the issue that you don't usually understand after running a shop for a long time is all the things that you have in that shop. Like if you've got tool holders, you've got collet wrenches, you've got collets, you've got all this stuff. When you start a new shop and it's not just moving, you have to get all that stuff again.
Right.
So it's like, oh, I have all these end mills, but they're across the country. So I need just to tool up, you need drill bits and end mills and tool holders and all this stuff that when I do an expansion, when I add a machine, I finance the machine, and then the rest of it I self-finance, or the company finances.
Right.
And that was kind of a little bit foolish, because all those little components add up to a ton.
Oh yeah. You want tool holders alone, I'm sure.
Tool holders, gauge pins. I mean, yeah, you've got that part. Now, how are you going to inspect it? Oh, and by the way, that raw stock, how are you going to cut it?
Right.
All these little things that you take for granted because they're right there. So it was one of those things where I can't really make money here. I can cut some parts, but I was using the machine as kind of as a saw, because you got a piece of bar stock and you need to cut it up into 6 pieces, but you don't have a saw. So you just put in a long end mill and you start chopping material.
Boy.
So mid-February, I drove back to California. The intention was to fly back a few times in March, but COVID happened. So COVID kind of put a huge dampener on the expansion's feasibility. But I was confident that it was still going to work. And Casey, who's the COO at that point, she was on a road trip because she was a remote worker. She ended up in the Bay Area at the same time that we had the shutdown. And the way that the law was written for the shutdown in the Bay Area is, unless you, and I think it was pretty much all across the country, unless you were doing work that was considered
essential,
then you should shut down. And as a prototype shop, we do some medical work, but I wouldn't have considered it essential. So we shut down because I didn't know what was going to happen. So I figured be the law-abiding citizen. It's the Bay Area. It's pretty liberal. I might as well be that guy too.
Right.
So but it did also state that you could maintain payroll. So that was like, well, why don't the C-suite just go into work? Because that sounds fine. So Casey, who had never been to a machine shop, got trained how to tape parts and, prep material and, get things going and set up machines and set tools and all this stuff. And I programmed to my heart's content. The manager at that shop, after about 2 weeks, said, I'm done sitting at home. Can I come in? If you're going to be in there, can I come in at night? And 3,500 square feet with 3 people, it's pretty well socially distanced.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So the 3 of us maintained payroll. I didn't let anybody go for that time. We only have 5 employees on the West Coast, so it wasn't a ton of payroll, but we are primarily programmers. So to be competitive in that, you're not paying somebody $10 an hour, you're paying them good money. So maintaining payroll when you have half your staff not doing anything is a pretty good chunk.
Oh yeah.
And then having just done this $1.5 million expansion where you're making $0, it's kind of an expensive ordeal. But in May, our friend Elon Musk, who's in Alameda County, decided we're going back to work. So manufacturing was now allowed to go back to work. I mean, it's either that or argue with Elon. I think that was the easier argument. So I packed up and drove back to the East Coast. And so then in June, I started hired my first, second, and third employee within a month on the East Coast. One of those employees is still with the company. The other 2, one got his dream job offered to him. So Vermont Technical College that year graduated 2, and one of them, and that the advanced manufacturing, they have really great technology. They've got Haas machines in it, and so that the machine to student ratio, student teacher ratio, like lots of skills right there. So really easy to plug in. But one of the employees that I hired, he had an electrical and mechanical background, and he really wanted to work at this big company down in Springfield, Vermont. And they actually made a position for him.
Oh,
so
wow.
he came in feeling kind of bad about it in August and said, "Hey, they just offered me my dream job. What should I do?" And I said, "Take the job." He said, "Well, I feel bad. I really like you. I like working here." And I said, "But if it's literally your dream job, what am I going to tell you to do? Suffer?" So he moved on. And then unfortunately, one of my other employees had a death in the family and had to reconfigure his life. But I then hired, over the last 18 months, I've hired 2 more individuals that had also gone through the Vermont Technical College program. And it's just really solid people who, in Vermont, there's not a lot of options for this type of work. And if you want to stay here, we offer a pretty good option, pay well, decent place to work, I think, I hope. And, that's my from 0 to 60. So
Okay.
that's where we are now in Vermont. We started with the 2 machines. I decided I don't have a CNC lathe on the West Coast. And I figured, well, why don't I get a CNC lathe? Because one of the things about having a lathe is, at least it's one more thing you can do. So we got a little ST20 just to, get yourself in trouble, no live tooling. And it's the first machine that I still have not built a part on. And it's kind of, it's kind of a new thing for me to have a piece of equipment that I could figure it out. I don't have the time to figure it out. And there are days when it's like, wow, if I could just get on that machine, I could do this. Then I'm like, I don't have 20 hours to figure it out. So that's the first time as a business owner that I have a piece of equipment that I would have to learn to run.
Right.
And I haven't had the time to learn to run. So it's kind of an incredible step. And that's been on the floor now for 18 months. And I've never built a part on it. I can jog it around. I can load. I mean,
Right.
I know what everything's doing, but
but it's the company's machine. It's not your baby anymore.
Yep. Yeah. So then we were getting a lot of big work. So we got a VM I was trying to get a more precise machine. So we're doing a lot of large work that needs to have tolerances plus or minus 5/10 on a 24-inch diameter.
Oh, wow.
And so I ordered a Haas VM6 with glass scales, and thinking that it'd be really accurate, and it is. I also got a little TRT 210 for 5-axis on that one. So those two 5-axis machines in Vermont. And then at the end of last year, I was getting more 5-axis complex work, but it was too big for the UMC 750. And the robotic cell is one of those things that is absolutely fantastic. The way, we're a prototype shop, but that's something that I call a cafeteria worker. It's not a pick and place of a single part. It's a pick and place of a pallet.
Right.
So if you program it right, whatever's on that pallet, you can have 55 different parts, or you can have 55 of the same parts, or any number in between. And that machine is like by far the best investment I've done. It is a little difficult to think around. The UMC 750 has 40 tools in it. To think kind of around standardizing your tool list to be able to do 80% of everything. And so it takes a little bit more time on the programming end, but because it'll run until it's out of stuff to do, it's a really wonderful thing. But so that machine was occupied every night running parts. And I wanted to do more precise 5-axis work, and I called my local tool person. No, not my local. I called Selway because that's who I've bought all my equipment from. And I said, hey, looking for a larger 5-axis. I was looking at the Haas UMC 1000, and but what else do you have that's available? And they had this Matsuura MX850, and I looked it up, and it's the largest 5-axis vertical that Matsuura makes. I was like, that's a good claim to fame.
That's a big boy. Yeah.
So it was a machine that I believe was ordered right around COVID time. So the company that had ordered it never took delivery. So it was already optioned with whatever this company had wanted. So 20,000 RPM spindle, 60 tool changer, laser probing, all this other shenanigans, laser tool set, standard Renishaw probing. And I got it at a decent discount, but it's a brand new machine built in late 2019. So one thing that you don't understand is if you buy a West Coast machine, it has to be shipped from the West Coast to the East Coast. That MX850 is 40,000 pounds oversized in height and width in its little box. So the shipping alone was $32,000 to get it from Port of Los Angeles over to Vermont.
That's rough.
Yeah, that was pretty spendy. But it came in. Being somebody who's only bought Haas machines new, they place the machine on the floor. You call your Haas factory outlet. They come running out and they set it up the next Tuesday. And the Matsuura was like 3 weeks later. They're in leveling, doing all this stuff, and then it's just a machine body. Then you got to get your probing. Then you've got to get your coolant is added later, and then your chip conveyor is added later, and all the stuff that. So before it was running, it was about 7 weeks, which to me on a machine that's more than $500,000, it's like every day that goes by that thing's not building a part is a lot of.
That's money.
A lot of gray hair. Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
So it being my first machine that I've owned, that's not a Haas controller. It was going back to a Fanuc controller that I hadn't run in a long time. And I'm standing there going like, why won't you just change the darn tool? Haas makes you feel like an idiot in front of any other machine because they make it so easy to change a tool. And then loading the program, I do not understand why you have to go to California and back and then run around the machine 3 times to get it to accept the program.
Fanuc is dead reliable, but also not even nowhere near dead simple. It is. Yep. Yeah.
And then the obvious question of why is the program memory limited to 8 MB on a 5-axis machine?
Yeah.
Who's in charge of that? But
and that's pretty expansive for a Fennec. I mean, usually like a 3-axis, you get like a few hundred K, and you're like, oh, that's a lot, like for a Fennec.
Yeah. So I mean, there's been definite things that I've learned of, how to work around things like that. But right as soon as it was up and running and I was building parts, I was like, okay, this thing's running, but it's only running while somebody's here. So we just recently placed an order for an AX4, another Trinity automation system. It's a 12 pallet system, but it's a larger robot. The robot we have in our AX5 is a 7 something, which is I think is a 100 kg robot.
Okay.
And we're going to get I believe it's 160 kg robot. So we're going to go from the AX5 gives you a 12-inch cube, or our AX5 does. They have a couple different iterations of the AX5. This is going to allow us to do an 18-inch tall, 24-inch cube.
Oh, wow.
Which is going to be significant. And being able to run lights out is going to be phenomenal, because that's a great way to make money on a expensive machine, is just to keep it running. So,
well, that brings up, we had quite a few questions about your choice of Trinity. Obsidian Tools asked about that versus, some of the other systems that are out there. George McCorley asked also about that. Did you look at others? Let's go into why Trinity. What else did you look at? Did you compare it to anything else? All the good stuff.
So I'd seen robotic cells. I'd seen pick and place. The Trinity system was the first time that I'd seen a robotic cell functioning the way it does. I'd seen pallet changers on horizontal machines. The pallet changers inside, like the Matsura has their own integrated systems. But really what this was, the versatility of the system and the expense. So at the point that we bought the Hawks with the Trinity, it was a $400,000 package deal. Mind you, there was no fixturing, work holding in there.
Right.
That took a little bit of research. So the system that Trinity puts on the machine is a Shunk Vero system.
Okay.
And so the pallets that they build have a Shunk single point, one single pole stud, and so that's how the pallets in the X5 are. So in order to make it function, the pallet's just a 7-inch round disc. You can put you could bolt a plate to it. You could, you can put a vise on it. You can put a small pyramid system on it. We could do pyramid schemes. No. And, but really for me, it was like the way that I work is trying to get rid of as many of the variables in the places that you can. So on the machine, it's the tooling, the tools that we use. Tool 1 on all of our machines is a 1/32 end mill. And then on the other side, it's like fixturing, tool work offsets and along those lines. So I started buying vices. On the West Coast, I've got a single UMC with, it's a lone machine. And I bought Lang base plate, riser blocks, Lang vices. They're phenomenal vices. They're beautiful. The thing that I didn't really like about them is the soft jaws are a little bit more complex to make.
Mm-hmm.
When I got my first 4th axis, I bought a 5th axis vise, and that's what I was using on the 4th. And I thought that vise was pretty good. There were some things I didn't like about it. As it got tighter, it was, things opened up a little bit, so the clamping force was reduced, or you'd have to dovetail it to get better clamping force. And then again, the soft jaw carriers wasn't the easiest thing to deal with for Z height, repeatability. So when I got to the East Coast, I ordered an orange vise. Mm-hmm. I ordered a Kurt self-centering vise, and I ordered a Shunk self-centering vise. And I already had the experience with the fifth axis and the Lang, because I figured if I'm going to tool this thing up, I couldn't afford to put 55 pallets loaded in that machine. I still don't have a fully loaded machine, because typically the machine is still running by the time you're back. And each vise, you do the math, a pallet with the shunt pull stud and all that shenanigans is about $450. And then each vise is,
1,000, 1,200, something like that.
Right. So you've got a small house inside of that machine when it's all up and running.
Yeah.
So, but really what it was going to be about is repeatability and things along those lines. We have the KSC 160, 125 vices. And the thing that's really beautiful about them is making the soft jaws is not quite Kurt simple, but pretty darn close. And the repeatability, because the jaw carriers are actually locate in X, Y, and Z, you can repeat 4/10 when you put on soft jaws. And I think that's phenomenal because they have locating blocks to go into. So that's kind of what sold me. So I had bought the 3 different vices that I hadn't had any experience with. The orange vice, unfortunately, is somewhere near the drill press. That kind of, I didn't realize that this orange vice wasn't self-centering. It was placing.
Right.
And then the Kurt vice, unfortunately, I know I've heard stuff on your podcast about Kurt vices, and that's the Neanderthals vice. But but I really like the HD 690s. I think those suckers are beasts, and they're really rigid, and I know them, and for me they're great vices. They're definitely not modern technology by any means, and you have to be pretty strong to be throwing those around. But I figured Kurt should have a pretty solid self-centering vice, which unfortunately that vice is a paperweight somewhere in my shop. It kind of gets brought out every now and then when people are like, "Why do you have shunt vices?" So I show them the other vices, and I'm like, "Here's why." The shunt vice, Langs are beautiful. They plate everything, and they're shiny, and they've got their macro grip system is really phenomenal, and but their threads are visible, and when you're doing fine milling, you get swarf inside those threads, and you want to open the vise quickly, and it's not easy.
Right.
The threads are all captured inside of a carrier, and you can't see them. There are like so many of these little things that I didn't know, because I don't know. I usually tell the guys who are tool sales guys that we'll talk when I'm ready, and it's not like these guys are running around with $1,200 vices in their back pockets. So that was the easiest way for me to get familiarity with them. At IMTS, I wasn't even at the point of thinking about spending that much money on anything. So buying one of each was the best way to get there. The question that was asked is did I look at Arawa? Did I look at the Lang system? And most of it was, did I look at Arawa? No, I did. That was my today's research thing, because I saw that question. I've now looked at it. And I realized that is an awesome system, because not only can you place large pallets, it can place small pallets. But then my brain goes to an Arawa vice is really expensive. So I guarantee that Arawa system is really expensive.
Yeah. So they just don't have the U.S. presence, I think, that Trinity does.
Yeah.
They're not partnered with somebody like Selway, and so you don't see them as much.
Yeah, and I think when I went on their website, it's like, which European country do you live in? And if you don't, you can send us an email and we'll talk to you about your country. But I know from quality, I work with a company that uses them primarily, and I think their stuff is phenomenal. Phenomenal price point on a prototype level is like great, kudos to us. But most people doing a prototype are not like, yeah, let's go ahead and buy a $3,400 vice for each one of these parts.
Right. So that's a tough sell when you have 55 pallets to fill.
Yeah. So it's so now I've looked at that, and now that gets my brain thinking, like, well, how can I get to that point? Because I like challenges. Like, where could I put one of those machines? The footprint of the Trinity is also really nice. It's smaller than the UMC, even though it has 55 pallets. They made it really compact. Not that I have this huge space issue, but if you're using space that's pointless, then that's, pointless waste of space. Spindles make more money than robots. And then the Lang system, I didn't really like the way it wasn't as modular. I mean, it wasn't as compact of a system. It was also, again, the Lang system is quite expensive. One of the reasons why Trinity stopped, I think they were working together with Lang, but Lang decided to come out with their own system and didn't really want to support something like Trinity. So it's good to know that there's other options out there. And then there's a ton of companies that are in the industry of automation. But I think really that the quick answer that I've now made really long and convoluted is the reason why I got the Trinity is because I saw it working. And then I thought, well, that's really cool. I need one of those.
That's awesome. So I want to step back real quick before we get on to the other questions. You mentioned you went out to Vermont for a friend's birthday and saw this dealership or ex-dealership. How long between you seeing it did you make the decision, like, this is KAD Models version 2 or location 2?
So, well, I think to step back at just 12 seconds further than that is, so one of the things that as a small business owner, you are constantly finding yourself at work because, especially for somebody who loves it. I absolutely adore building parts. Like, it is, if there were drugs and part building was a drug, that would be my drug of choice.
Right.
But one of the things that I also know is, like, in order to get a business successful and sellable and this, that, and the other thing, you have to find yourself not always at work. Because to sell somebody a business who has no idea about manufacturing, be like, here's this cool business. It's profitable and this, that, and the other thing. And if they say, what happens if you step away? My answer would be like, well, it's not quite as profitable.
Yeah.
So, and then, I spending a bunch of time at work and I had this brilliant idea, which is probably something that a psychiatrist would say is self-defeating or something. Like, if my problem is I find myself at work constantly, if I have two places to work, I can't be at work constantly. I would have to be. So
I'm not sure the math checks out on that, but
no. And then in order to make it simpler, I figured that 3,600 miles door to door was going to be the simplest way to make this work. So create an idea that is the most complicated thing in the world, and then make it more complicated by, it's not like I went to Boston where you can get a direct flight SFO to Boston. No, I came to Vermont where you cannot, unless you buy a Lear, get a direct flight.
right.
So to get to Vermont, you either fly to Chicago first, or you fly to Boston and you drive, or you fly to JFK. So it's a day. Let's just call it a day to get between San Francisco and Vermont. But before I landed on Vermont, I did talk to the city. I did go to Detroit. I did run around Detroit and look at places. And I did look at Philadelphia, and I did look at Pittsburgh. But really what it was is, like, kind of looked at the cost of the property and found that the manufacturing education that people were getting at BTC, and then really what super sold it was when I sent an email to somebody in the state of Vermont, or the fact that I was just talking to somebody and small town gossip. All of a sudden there was a question from the local newspaper, like, hey, we heard that you're going to do this, and it sounded really good. California company comes to Vermont, and then the story gets a little less, really good for community, but a little less exciting when it's like, well, actually he grew up over the hill. So,
Right.
So it's not really a Silicon Valley company coming to Vermont. It's somebody coming home. So that's kind of a feel good story. But yeah, so that's from when I had the idea of expanding to when the second location was open. It was about a year.
Okay.
But from making the decision, so I had decided to think about it, and my thinking process usually goes pretty fast. So from where I was to the Burlington airport is an hour. So by the time I got to the airport, it was an hour later, and I found the realtor's contact information, and I found the contact information for the person at BTC. So I'm waiting for my airplane in Burlington, sent 3 emails. And then by the time I got to New York, which is an hour later, I had responses from 2 of the people I emailed saying that, the price of the property, and we think that you should be able to do a business here. And so then that was a Sunday. And on Monday, I sent an email to my bank and I said, just hypothetically, is this doable? And they said, sure. And I said, I'm talking about this amount of money. And I said, oh yeah, no, that sounds fine. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, so then I just said, can I have a letter so I can send an offer? So that was by Wednesday, I had put an offer on the property. And then I was like, well, the ball's rolling, but the property, I needed to do have an environmental study done because it was going to be bank financed. That's when they came up with the issue with the environmental stuff. And, so that was like, well, the bank's like, we still want to loan you on the equipment, do an SBA loan on the equipment, but the property is out of the question. So that was kind of like, oh, well, oh darn. But work with the state of Vermont, make a phone call, contact somebody, and they're like, well, here's a way to do it. And I said, okay, let's do that. So we were able to go from having that being shot down in late August to a new solution. And then when you're trying to borrow that much money through an SBA loan, there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through. You have to basically show the bottoms of your feet. You have to show like careful. But I got through it, and my goal was to have everything done by the end of 2019. And on December 31st, I was in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and had to find a U.S. bank near the end of the day on New Year's Eve and sign the documents. And it was like we were done with that portion of it. And then the equipment could be released. And it was like that was the most difficult, like 6 weeks of, here I am thinking that everything is fine, and then they do another check on all of your financials, and then they make this question and do this stuff. And it's not something you think about when you put together a financial package of how you're going to supply money. When you actually are going to, write a check from here, your personal account, they check that. And it was this learning thing. It was like, you have to have access, or you have to have so many boxes that you check in order for everything to work out perfectly. And then you're relying on 17 different individuals, and they're talking to the federal government and all this stuff. So luckily it all worked out, before 2020, when stuff wouldn't have worked out very well.
Yeah, that would have made it infinitely worse for sure.
Yeah.
Let's see. Another question from Austere Manufacturing was, what are the biggest or unforeseen challenges with automations and lights out machining? Because I think a lot of us are looking towards that. Help is getting harder and harder to find. We see companies like yours, and we're like, yeah, that's the dream right there. Some kind of robotic cell. What challenges, or like, what's the biggest issues you've found running stuff like that?
So I think if you're a very well-established company with the standard, the way you operate, and if you're a short, high mix, low volume, the question is often like how or why. And really what that is if you're a production shop, that you've got programmers, but you don't have all programmers, and you've got operators who are tending to load and unload. So the automation that you choose for that type of shop could be a loader. The automation for me, I'm really wanting something that could facilitate the high mix, low volume, because sometimes my pallet is holding a 12-inch cube, and sometimes it's holding a 1-inch cube, and I wanted the versatility, and that's why I went with this system. The ease of use. It's all that is a scheduler. I mean, I walk up to the graphical interface on that machine, and I'm just telling it which pallet is what program number.
Right.
And the machine just is running this loop program that says, once you're done with this, look at what's offered to you next. It's a very simple, I mean, the training on that from when it was set up to when I was operating was about 11 minutes.
Wow.
It was very, I was like, and then what? It was like, that is it. Like,
then you make money.
Yeah. But the big thing is getting your brain around how it's going to function. So it's like you standardize I've always done this because I'm a prototype shop, is have a standardized tool list.
Mm-hmm.
So East Coast, West Coast, if I put a piece of material in a machine, I know where the G54XYZ0 is if it's in a vise, and I know what tool 6 is, and I know what tool 17 is. And, we've got a standard tool list that runs up to 20. And then after that, it's variable. And that's the big thing, is changing it so you don't have variables everywhere. Your variables are limited to your program. And you might have to decide whether or not you want to bore a hole versus drill and ream a hole. But oftentimes that's very little sacrifice when you take into consideration you're now getting, if you're a single shift company, you're now getting those extra 16 hours, and you're getting that extra weekend that you aren't running. And because you're high mix, low volume, you're still charging the same type of pricing, or it allows you that competitive edge where you can drop your pricing
right
to run prototypes because it's unmanned. The issues that I have had are a machine is really good at making a part or scrapping a part, and you add automation to that, and it's really good at making a lot of parts that are really good or a lot of parts that are really bad. Do you have
any lessons learned from automating all this stuff? Like, have you seen, the more I talk to people who have automated, it seems like there's the hidden things, chip evacuation that you didn't know is a problem. And so you're running 50 parts unattended, or tools that you thought lasted forever and then it turns out they didn't, or, operation types even that you thought were bulletproof, but really over and over and over, that's where they bite you.
So on the tooling, one of the things that I learned pretty quickly is one of my employees, who was brand new in a machine shop, wasn't super precise on the location in X on one of the vices of a piece of steel. With aluminum, it just takes a bigger cut. With steel, well, it takes a cutter. And what had happened is, you leave on a Friday and you come back on Saturday because nobody actually doesn't come in. So I went back on Saturday morning, and there was a completely clear carousel of tooling, and none of the parts were run because the second part that went into the system was off by 150 thousandths and broke the roughing tool, and then the rest is history. So the things that I learned were, your roughing tools, just put the probing in, just do the checking, because it might be frustrating to come back to a machine that stopped, but at least you're not coming back to scrap material or a whole bunch of scrap cutters. And if you set up your Haas machine, or even the Matsura will send you a message if there's an alarm.
Mm-hmm.
So it's exercising that little bit more headache in order to give yourself relief. But oftentimes I try to run lights out the material that's softer. The programs, what we do during the day is we prove out programs. So in Vermont, there's 4 of us that program we've set it up so the same G54 on the Matsura, on the VM with the TRT 210 and the Haas, the UMC 750. So when we're programming, it's just a different post processor, and you can prove out on 3 different machines. And as long as you utilize the same tooling, which, at the end of the day, it's choosing a tooling supplier and a tool holding supplier that has consistent stock, and you can use that. So you're not swapping out tool holders all the time for a longer one or shorter one.
Right.
And that's really what we do is we prove out a program 100% and make sure that part runs well. And then while that's going, somebody else is proving out another program. And near the end of the day, we start loading the robotic cell with different materials. And each one of my employees has a different prefix. Like I get 7,000 is my program series, and Brandon's 1,000, and Garrett's 3,000, and Alex's. So that's what we do is so you don't accidentally put in the wrong program.
Right. Or overwrite somebody else's program.
Yeah.
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 Makes sense.
And that's kind of the way we work. So the lessons learned are just, you got to go slow before you go fast. And sometimes you just got to learn the hard way.
Okay.
So, yep.
Another question from Josh at NH Micro. He said, as you scale up and grow, what have been some roadblocks and limiting factors, both on a technical level and a personal level? And how did you overcome these roadblocks?
So the technical level is always like, how do you make more of your time? And I still haven't figured out how to make more time. In having a 3-hour time change between East Coast and West Coast, I now have a 27-hour day, which I think is pretty awesome. But those technical difficulties tend to be, there. It doesn't matter how big you get, you're still going to have, equipment down. What I've figured out is having some sort of redundancy is a really important thing. So if you have only one 5-axis machine and it goes down, that's a problem. And it's very difficult to get to the point of 2 when you're still trying to pay for the 1 or figure the 1 out. But I think time, that's how you overcome that one, is you slowly grow and you don't overwhelm yourself too much.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, COVID, I literally sat down on the floor in tears because I was just like, I was at the point where it's like, I had just done this huge investment, and I'm at the point where it's like, since in the US since 2008, if you have a corporation, even you're signing personal guarantees when you do stuff. And it's a lot to hinge on. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm making, like, to me, I have a heart, and sometimes having a heart as a business owner is not the right thing. So, could I have furloughed my employees? Could I have laid them all off? Absolutely. Would that have been the best financial decision for the company? Absolutely. But in the long run, would that be the best financial decision for the company? Probably not, because having skilled labor that's highly skilled and invested in your company and knows how you operate things, it would have been the dumbest move, because I can't go and duplicate somebody. And if you imagine yourself, if somebody gives up on the potential, are you going to run back to that employer and be like, well, stuff got tough and this is what happened. I can't trust that. I need to look for something else. So,
right.
But staying true to yourself as a human, I think, is the best way to be successful in operating a business, even though there are times when you're just like, you're frustrated about X, Y, and Z because you're the one taking the risks and seemingly also all the stress. And I think one of the big things is like what I talked about at the beginning, that lathe that I don't know how to operate. And I think it's sometimes just letting go of things that aren't really, it would benefit me to know how to run that lathe, but at the same time, I would be much better quoting it or talking to a new client or taking on a project or facilitating something that I am to learn a piece of equipment. So it's part of it is letting go of the stuff that, you should be able to.
Okay. Yeah, I like that answer. And I completely agree. You got to be honest and be a good human first. Like, I think there's so much push in this like grind culture of like, screw people, money's king, blah, blah, blah. But like, that doesn't get you far as a person in life. That might get your business far, but that's just a terrible way to look at it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, there are days where it's difficult to be the awesome human you want to be.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and so you not to plug them too hard, but this is actually something I've been looking into for the last couple of weeks. You have paperless parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's something that keeps coming up in conversation. I've been talking about, automated quoting systems with people, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm happy to spend money to get back time.
Yeah,
and that seems like a great way to do that.
Yeah, so when that was part of my thing when I started the East Coast facility. So IMTS 2018, I was kind of like, I was looking at stuff, when you're in your own little hole of manufacturing, you're like, this is the greatest stuff in the world, and this, that, and the other thing. You go to IMTS and you see something like an index, and you're like, it is a revolver of manufacturing. It's like, that is the coolest machine in the world. And like,
yeah,
I still want to figure out how I can get one of those, but that's like financing a yacht.
Sure is.
So, but I was also kind of looking at softwares that would help me with that, because I feel that I'm a fast quoter. I bet I've built 50,000 unique parts, and I've quoted way more than that. And so I can look at a part and I can quote it pretty quickly, but that's one guy quoting. Then if you have to take a part into your CAD software, you've got to analyze, the geometry, the bounding box and things like that. And it's, you get your material costs, and then that's one part out of a quote package. And then if you say that you attempt to win a third of what you quote, and you can only, quote 5 parts a day, you can't scale a business on that unless you develop a quoting team. Right. And I really think that one of the things that I'm the most passionate about in manufacturing is actually building stuff. And I wanted to create a team of makers and builders. And so in order to do that, it's give people as much time to build as they can. So at IMTS, there was this company called Machine Research. They were building a quoting software. I looked into it. It took more time than I wanted, and I didn't really do what I wanted. So then I shelved that. And then early 2020, I was on LinkedIn and I came across this little article by this guy, Jason Ray, and he had something about this thing called paperless parts. So I started Googling. And then I had an introductory conversation with them. And then I'm the person who's like, well, let me look at their website. And they had this list of a few machine shops so I cold called those machine shops. Then I get this call really quickly from Jason saying, hey, what are you doing calling my customers? I was just curious to see what they thought. And so next time I get an introduction, I was like, well, it's on the website. But,
yeah, that's not how this works.
So, I mean, it's unbiased, really.
Right.
But I had dabbled in working, done work with Fictive. We're still on their website as a success story, but what I like owning the work that I do. I like, having that relationship with the customer, and it's kind of it's a nice place to be. And, the working with a company like that, you lose control of, I got into manufacturing because I like solving problems. If I'm working under somebody, then I am solving a problem that they're getting credit for. And if we're successful and it's a good relationship and it's a good fit, well, I no longer am that good fit, because it's whoever's above you is the good fit. Right. So, I think that they offer a lot of service for companies, but it's, to me, was not, they're going a different direction than I wanted to go. And I still needed this ability to make parts. And in order to make parts, I needed time to. So I did this interview, talked to Jason Ray at Paperless Parts, and had a conversation. They were relatively small, and their software kind of worked. I mean, it's you would dump your step file in. It would tell you how big the bounding box was. It would also show you machine directions. So it's not 100% accurate, but you could see that this is a 3-out part or 5-out part. And then it would kind of compute, you know, if it's 3 operations, half hour per setup, it sort of just break those things down really quickly. But also there's math under the hood that tells you about the material weight and the overall billet size, and you could put in how much you pay per pound of aluminum or steel, or so quickly you would be able to get the pricing for material, and you'd be able to get the assumed number of operations. So it after working with them for about 2 months, I got to the point where I could go from a part that kind of came into an email to a quote in about 3 minutes per part, and that was significant. And a few of the other things that I think is very interesting. I mean, with the system, for a couple dollars more, for I think it was $20 more, $200 more, I was able to have 2 locations on there. So when it's a client from the East Coast, I can put the ship from as the East Coast. When it's a client from the West Coast, I can put the ship from. And I can have that separation of East Coast, West Coast, so we can tell who's going to build what projects. For the most part, that works out. Sometimes we need to help each other.
Right. Well, you got the lathe, they don't, things like that.
Yeah. And but the some of the key components is, as a manufacturer, and somebody says, "Hey, can you do better on time?" You look at something, you quote it for 15 days because that's how long it's going to take you, and you say it's $100 a piece at 15 days. Now, if a customer says, "Hey, I really need these sooner. Can I expedite it?" And you kind of think about it, and I was like, "What's really fair?" And when you say, "I can build it in 15 days," I also have the material here. I can probably do it in 10 days. Maybe I'll charge 15% more. With just the simple click of a button adding expedites on the software, I can give the customer the choice of taking off 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, or whatever I decide are my expedite options, and then the percentage.
Right.
So when I send somebody a quote who's requesting expedited, they can see how much it would pay for regular time and how much it would cost to do it expedited, and then it's not on my conscience how much they're willing to pay for that project, because really, when somebody needs something really fast, it does take more effort, because you might have to work later times. You might have to ask somebody to switch gears and tear down a setup and reset it up later.
Right. Or overnight tools, or, there's a lot of things that go into an expedite.
Yeah. And yeah, there's those things, are asking a material supplier to get you material faster by paying COD. And what ends up happening is, when the customer gets that choice of getting things faster, it's no longer on you to feel bad about charging it, because it's fair market value, because you show them what the value of the project is, and then they decide how much it's worth to get it faster. And I think that we do about, on the annual basis, about 10% of our revenue is now off of expedite.
Yeah.
So even if you're doing $75,000 a year, 10% of that pays for the software.
Totally.
But then the real thing is the time savings. So if I value my time like I pay myself, then if I get back 8 hours that I can actually build parts per week, then I'm generating revenue and I'm doing better for the company. So it really is a lot of that. And then adding it to our website, so a customer doesn't have to call me up or send an email. It pre-populates. It's very helpful, because the customer can add in the material cost, or not the material cost, but the material type, the quantities and things like that. It saves me a lot of time. So you can give large corporations more of a B2C experience than a B2B experience. And oftentimes in the world of buying now, our Amazon mentality, if you don't have to deal with somebody and you can just click an order, it gets you there faster. It gets orders done faster, and new clients can pay directly with a credit card versus having to go through purchasing department when they need something in a hurry.
Right.
So it's kind of a win-win-win. I think is a wonderful company to work with. Any problems that I've had somebody get back to me really quickly. I don't at first when I got it, I was like, I don't want anybody to know about this software because it's, but at the end of the day, you still have to do the work. You still have to verify that the quote is correct, and then you still have to build the parts. So,
right.
You don't actually win because it's not like it goes from there to a machine and the machine does it all.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. One thing I had my, demo with them, and one thing that I took from it that like thinking back on it, it's like such a no brainer, but what they emphasize is that you don't want to win 100% of your quotes. And like, that's, I think as a business person, anybody from the business background is like, well, yeah, no duh. But like anybody from like a competitive machinist background, you're like, of course I want to win everything. Yeah. But like, that means you're too cheap is the thing that they boil it down to, is like, if you're winning 100% of your quotes, A, you're overloading your shop, and B, you're way too cheap. Like you should be winning. I think they said target like 50% or something. But
yeah, I do a third because like when I first started my company, I wanted to be able to do anything for anybody. So when somebody would say that's too expensive, I'd be like, oh, okay, well, how much can you afford?
Right.
It's like all of a sudden you're doing a $2,000 job for $300, and then a real job, not a real job, but another job comes in where the customer is willing to value your time like you do. And then you're like, oh, why am I spending time doing something like this? And it's, it's going back to, it's not out of your budget, or I'm not too expensive. It's just not in your budget.
Right.
And I think that's a good way to look at things. Because, you spend several $1 million on equipment and you spend years learning how to do it. There is value there. If everybody had a CNC machine in their basement, then we wouldn't have this problem of, workforce development.
Right. Definitely. Well, I would be remiss if the last question I didn't ask you was about your cars, your Datsun. We had a lot of questions about the 240, just your car collection in general. I'm a big car guy. My business partner has a 260 he's restoring. So let's quickly get into that, because I definitely want to touch on that at least.
So as I said at the beginning, when I got out of the military, I got a 240Z. I'd never seen a Z car when I was younger because they had all rotted away. A car that's 7 years old in Vermont is gone.
Right.
It's patched together with duct tape and spray foam. But so I got this car, and there's like parts were available. It was easy to work on and things like that. And when I started my company, I had sold my Z car. Selling that had funded selling that in my Tesla stock. Had funded. I bought Tesla when they IPO'd, and I sold Tesla for like $100 a share. So,
oh boy, you made money, but still, yeah.
I have a machine shop now.
Yeah, exactly.
But what happened is, like, I sold that car, and I really liked it, but that's you do something for your own good, and that was something I did for my own good. And I spent a ton of time rebuilding that thing, and I learned a lot of things that I would do differently. The next car I got to restore was a Datsun 1600 Roadster. So before the Z car, they had convertibles, and in that car I still have. It's baby blue. I started building it in 2015, and I bought the car in 2011. I was finished building it in 2015. It took me a long time to get parts and things along those lines, but since then I've restored like one car per year.
Oh, cool.
And I've stayed kind of in the Datsun family. There's some cars that I did full mechanical restoration, and then there's a yellow car, or lime green, or whatever you want to call it, that's on our website. And then every now and then it shows up in a picture that I took that thing completely apart, every nut, every bolt, had replated, had to paint the body. I don't do body work. That is not something that I want to do. It's like mudding a wall. It's like, there are people who are really good at it, and they can hide stuff that I would see till I die.
Right.
but full mechanical restoration, it's, for me, it's just like a huge box of Legos. So I've done, I have 4 Datsun Roadsters.
Wow.
At one point I had 3 Z cars. I'm down to, actually I had 4 Z cars. I'm down to 2 Z cars. I've got a Datsun 411, which is 510s are the thing that people know. A 411 is kind of a neat story. It's a Pininfarina designed the body, so it's an Italian body. The and a Japanese car, so it's just kind of a pretty little thing. Not practical. It's a 1.3 liter. That one I did a full mechanical restoration. The body, it was brand new, bought in the San Francisco Bay Area, never really left. The paint has been lubbed off of it in many places. And then I got into Nissan Patrols, and so they look like an FJ40 or a Jeep. They only imported 3,600 of those, so they're pretty rare. In being pretty rare, doesn't mean that they're really valuable. In fact,
I saw you sold that one on Bring a Trailer.
Yeah, I sold one on Bring a Trailer. I still have another one. I'm one of those guys who's like, here's one, and then somebody will send me a message, hey, you got that Patrol, but look, here's another one. I'm like, shit, I should get that. So, and then for a long time when I was a little kid, Dodge Power Wagons were like this really cool thing. And I came across a Dodge Power Wagon in like 2018. It was a 1953 Power Wagon. It is a ginormous vehicle on the outside, and the cabin of the truck is probably about the same size as a Toyota single cab.
Mm-hmm.
But very, very cool vehicle. And that's my next restoration project. Unfortunately, with expanding the business, I haven't been able to do anything with it, but that's the next one. And I'm trying to figure out whether that gets somehow shipped to Vermont with the next machine purchase or what, because that is not a vehicle I'm going to drive cross country. 2 years ago, I guess it was Christmas time or beginning of January 2021. I had, before leaving the West Coast to do the expansion, I had taken apart my orange Z car, rebuilt the motor, and done all the shenanigans, and came across country, and I had left the motor out. So I went back Christmas Day. I put the motor back in, drove it for a couple hundred miles, figured this is fine, and then took the southern route and drove the thing back to Vermont.
Oh my goodness.
So drove from Berkeley down to Arizona, and then Arizona all the way across the longest portion of Texas. Stopped and saw friends in Houston and Louisiana, and drove up the border, up the East Coast. Only saw snow for about 15 minutes in January, which was pretty good because salt Z cars, snow Z cars, not good for that. So That car is here in Vermont. And somebody had asked a question about a L28 ET.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually supercharging doing a triple carburetor, blow through supercharged L28 on that.
Cool.
Yeah. So, well, in theory, everybody I've talked to says fuel injection with superchargers, fuel injection with turbos. And there's a reason why you do that, because the computer can control the fuel. And I just think that I haven't done it before, so that's why it hasn't been successful. I had a Maserati bi-turbo for about 12 seconds.
Okay.
My girlfriend at the time and I had watched some movie, and she's like, "What is that car?" I was like, "It's a Maserati." And she said, "Let's get one of those." And I went on Craigslist, and there's a Maserati. And the bi-turbo is the reason why Maserati left the US for many years. They were embarrassed. But it was a blow-through turbo. And that car it only had 23,000 miles on it, and it tried to kill me twice. And I was like, this needs to go away.
Oh boy.
But
I can tell you, my business partner, he's now doing a full engine swap in his 260, but I think he did a mega squirt fuel injection and then added a turbo to his. And that thing was a blast and worked so well.
Yeah. I mean, it is phenomenal. Those cars sound fantastic. They handle really well. I mean, it's a 50-year-old car now.
Yeah. Well, it's insane the community that's still around it. Like, there's a guy who I want to say within the last 2 or 3 years developed a dual overhead cam
Yep.
head for them and is now getting them cast and machined and all that. And like, that's insane for a car of that age.
Yeah, it's phenomenal because he used basically the design of the K20 motor from Honda to develop that head. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So
that's really cool. Well, that's awesome. I'm sure if you'll be at IMCS this year, Brad's coming with me, and you guys will have to chat about Z's because he's big into it, and he's doing a Mercedes engine swap now because he found this M104 from the E-Type.
Oh man,
in the 90s, and found out very quickly doing some research that this thing's like a unsung hero, and you can easily make 600-700 horsepower on a stock everything, and that 1,000 horsepower with very minimal modifications to the motor, which is just nuts.
Yeah, that's too much power for that chassis. But I don't know. I think that it's phenomenal to find out what it's like. I think that a beautiful thing about a classic car is it's so easy to take a motor out, put a different one back in.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes you say, whoops.
Yeah, we'll see. I know he's not shooting for 1,000 by any means because he knows that the frame will twist on him and he'll wrap it around a tree in about 10 seconds. But
yeah,
it was still cool to see just how reliable these, engines that nobody seems to care about are.
Yeah, that's neat. I mean, a lot of those Highline cars get that way. They, you can get a brand new BMW for $50,000, and then, not in today's time, it's still worth a bunch. But like a couple of years ago, a 2-year-old Mercedes or a BMW, it's like drops price by 80%.
Right.
Whereas if it was a Toyota truck, it'd go up in value.
Ain't that the truth? Well, you kind of mentioned the next machine purchase, so let's get into shop news and new things. Is there an incoming machine besides the Trinity cell for the Matsura?
So that right now is the next big purchase. I mean, that's about 250,000 before you get vices on it. That's kind of like that's the next big change that's going to happen here on the West Coast. This year, I'm going to add another 5-axis to the West Coast. I mean, it's when you're at a location, the emergency that's visible is easy to see. Mm-hmm. But we have only one 5-axis on the West Coast, and it'd be really nice for them to have the redundancy as well. And as soon as you start running parts on a 5-axis, even if it's just 3+2, taking something from a 5-op part to a single-op part is just phenomenal. I mean, you do tabbing off, and oftentimes parts are single op, or they just have a quick op. So that's what we're going to do. I haven't decided if it's going to be a UMC 500 or a UMC 750. For the work that we do, people will say that Haas machines are this, that, and the other thing, but I've had nothing but great luck with them. We've got our oldest Haas machine is a 2011, and it builds parts just as nicely as it did. We're not a production shop, so we don't have tens of thousands of hours on these spindles. So I can't argue when somebody's like, yeah, we ran it for 5 years and it blew up. 5 years at a prototype shop versus 5 years at a production shop is going to be completely different. The big thing for KAD itself is I'm trying to help develop a program to help train more people in the industry. So at this point, we're looking at creating a system to train people from other companies. Because there's an argument that there's nobody to do what we do. And then if you are on social media, LinkedIn, there's an argument of the pay is actually horrible. But being a machinist to me is like, you can be a machinist who's a manual machinist. You can be a machinist who's a 3-axis machinist. You can be a 5-axis machinist. I'll get flack for this, but you can also say the same thing for a retail worker. You can be selling avocados on the side of the road, or you can be working selling diamonds. Like there's a lot of space between one thing and the next. And I think what often happens is people get stuck, or a company is can't quite get to that automation or can't quite get to that 5-axis. And a lot of that has to do with training. And the more people that retire out of the industry, the less internal training is available. And
Right.
oftentimes, if you're, the first time you hire somebody as a small business, you realize that your revenue drops because you're training somebody. So that's an intense suck on a business. And if you've lost half your staff to retirement, just imagine, trying to take the other half and train people. You just fall on your face. And a lot of people can't take the time to do to go to school, take classes and things along those lines because time is money. So what we're trying to develop is a collaboration between industry and our company. So if you're a company that has, you have need for 5-axis manufacturing, and you are, you're not quite at the point to be able to train, but you have the projects that allow it. We take some of your staff and we, build that cell within our company, and then give that back to you in 20 weeks.
Oh, wow.
As your employees upskilled and either your equipment back or we're training on equipment similarly. Oftentimes what I find with the skills in schools is they're primarily Haas machines. And in industry, it's whatever machine you can afford, or, you're doing work that's really tight tolerance and you need a Harmony or you need a DMG or you need this. And if everybody's only trained on a Haas, there's, again, for me, the controller, the main basic principle of a controller is to basically hold the program, hold the tools. So I personally don't believe there should be much conversational programming going on in a modern shop.
I would agree. Yeah.
But, what we do for our training is the first day of work, somebody gets cam in the machine. And that's very different than, going to school where you learn how to grind a tool to put in a lathe and spin it and all that. So I do a top-down approach for manufacturing, where it's when you're a kid or when you need a phone, you don't go out and get a rotary and figure out how that works.
That's fair. I think that's a fair analysis of that for sure.
But I've not to discount how important it is to know how things work and how to cut a piece of material on a table saw or bandsaw or that. But oftentimes it's a lot easier to train somebody why deburring a part is important when they're bleeding.
Yeah.
So there's things like that. So I think educating with technology is a really great way to do it. But we've been doing the education for manufacturing in such a way for so long that it's, you walk into any school and the first day, it's like, you need all this math, and math is good, but I've never sat down and done a calculation when I'm machining something. I mean, I've done, well, no, that's not true, because there's metric prints and there's English prints, and you do sometimes 24.5 or 3937, but
I don't think you can be a modern machinist without having at least one browser tab open to Google's, metrics to English or vice versa.
But I think it's really important that we start teaching people that modern technology is not, not something to wait 2 years to touch. It's like you should be touching that on day one.
Yeah.
And if you really want to run over and touch a bridge port, on the West Coast, I have a bridge port and I have a Clausen lathe. On the East Coast, I have a $50 drill press that you have to hand start because the starter went on the motor.
Oh, geez.
So I do have manual tools, but that's the only one. So I find that it's really important to do that and to upskill. But I, again, was not trained to be a machinist. I didn't know that there were rules. So,
well, and I think teaching not in a vacuum is important for sure. Teaching, like you said, ground up is great, but you have to show why it applies and why they care. The care is, I think, the biggest thing missing in a lot of education. I went to a few years of mechanical engineering school and took material sciences class. And at the time I was like, this is the most boring thing ever. And now that I work with half the materials we discussed in the class, it's like, man, I really wish that I had paid more attention, because now I have the reason to care about that stuff.
Yeah, the practicality, like that's the main thing that's missing. It's the same thing as like geometry as math in school made a lot of sense. Algebra, calculus, I don't know. I do not know why these letters have to have anything to do with my numbers.
Well, that brings me to the last question I ask every guest every week. And you kind of answered it earlier, but maybe you have some other things you've been looking at. But what did you research this week? It can be anything. I've had guests talk about things they researched for their babies, or car stuff, or, what food you're putting in your body this week. What has been popping up in Google or your search browser sometime this week?
Oh man. Well, I mean, so yeah, you said babies. My partner and I are expecting in August. So
Congrats.
that's something that it's like, there's all these things that are unknown unknowns. She's a midwife, so she knows more than I'll ever need to know about childbirth and that stuff. And I'm just worried about, is my Irish Wolfhound going to eat my baby? But I mean, so there's tons of stuff. I mean, I'm constantly curious about things, and I'm always learning. And the question that somebody asked about the robotic cell, it's like, you only know what you have exposure to. And, I listen to the news, and I, one of the things that happens is I often am looking at what other machinists are doing and finding out how neat it is. But so, yeah, I've done the car seat thing recently. Like there are 1,000, I don't know why there's so many different car seats. I think that there should be one, and that should be safe. So doing that. And then also with the machining, there's always something that I'm looking into. This week I've decided that instead of on my Matsura posting operation with complex parts, because like I said, I don't get to show my work. So often my Instagram is, here's a block, and what it turns into is you'll never see.
Yep.
But having op one, part two, part three goes against my rules, because I like to have a complete program available. So when it's posted, it's done. If you ever need to go back to it, it's finished. But with the Matsura, I have to do the part one, part two, part three, because the program, I couldn't for the life of me find the easy way to store it on its data server and feed it to itself. So that's what I've done this week. That's my machine research, is getting that system to work.
Oh yeah, because you should be able to run it directly from the data server.
You absolutely
quite a few Matsuras, and it sucks, but that's awesome.
You have to call it something else, and you have to load a different tab on there. And I've got all the pieces together. The machine's been running. All I have to do this one of my weekend projects. On the weekend, the phone doesn't ring, and for the most part, my employees don't come into work. I allow my employees to use the equipment on the weekends. So sometimes they do come in, but at least we're not asking work questions. So this weekend, I hope to implement that. So
awesome. Well, good luck. I'm sure you'll get it figured out in no time.
Well, that's the hope. I'm going to call you if I can't.
Sounds good. I have no experience with the new HMI, but on the standard FANUC ones, we never had an issue with it. Besides it just being kind of a pain that it had to reside in the data server.
Yeah, I feel like if every tool company had the same Haas tip of the day, and the Haas, like if you want to know how to do it stuff, it'd be so much easier to work in. But
yeah, definitely. Well, real quick before I close, thank yous for the Patreon. Clint Wheeler, thanks for joining the Patreon. Lets me do awesome interviews with great people like Brian. And thank you so much, Brian, for coming on. I know you are clearly just like super busy, so dedicating an hour and 50 minutes to my show, I really, really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate being called up, because it's a lot of fun to talk to people for me.
Definitely. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and I'll be back next week.